Dad barred me from home until I apologized to my golden child sister. I merely said, all right. The next morning, I was gone. And what followed devastated them all. You heard me correctly, Dad stated, his voice flat, carrying that cold, final tone he reserved for pronouncements. Until you apologize properly to your sister for embarrassing her in front of her friends, you're suspended from this family. No dinner table, no family activities, no privileges whatsoever. The irony of his words burned in my chest, a hot, angry knot. Vivian had been tormenting me for months, maybe even years. She'd steal my homework just to copy it, break my belongings, and then claim it was an accident, and spread rumors at school that made my junior year a living hell. Just yesterday, she'd tried to humiliate me in front of her popular crowd. She accidentally spilled paint on my art project during lunch, right in the middle of the crowded cafeteria. Something inside me, something that had been quiet for too long, finally snapped. I stood up, slow and deliberate. I grabbed her ridiculously expensive designer water bottle, and maintaining eye contact, I poured it, slowly, over her perfectly styled hair. The cafeteria erupted. A shocked, then delighted, chorus of laughter filled the room. And for the first time in my life, I felt powerful instead of utterly invisible. Your behavior was completely unacceptable, Dad continued, completely oblivious to the years of Vivian's calculated cruelty. Vivian, of course, had come home in tears, playing the victim perfectly. She's your younger sister, he said, his voice laced with manufactured disappointment, and you should be protecting her, not attacking her. Younger by 11 months. But in our household, birth order didn't matter half as much as golden child status, a title Vivian had claimed the moment she entered the world. I understand, I said quietly, watching Vivian's smirk grow, a triumphant little curve on her lips. She expected the tears, the begging, the usual performance I'd given countless times before. Dad blinked, clearly anticipating resistance from me. Good, he said, then you'll apologize, and we can move past this unfortunate incident. All right. The word hung in the air between us like a death knell. Vivian's expression flickered from triumph to genuine confusion. Dad nodded curtly, then turned and left, no doubt heading to comfort his precious daughter and assure her that justice would prevail. I waited until the house settled into its familiar evening routine. Mom was at her book club, like every Tuesday. Dad was engrossed in his crime shows in the living room, and Vivian was upstairs, video chatting with friends, undoubtedly recounting her version of events with maximum dramatic flair. Moving with a practiced silence born from years of avoiding confrontation, I gathered essentials into my largest backpack. 3 years of babysitting and summer jobs had given me nearly $800 in cash, carefully hidden from Vivian's sticky fingers. My laptop charger, a few changes of clothes, toiletries, and all the important documents I'd been gradually collecting over the past year for college applications. The planning wasn't new. I'd been preparing for this moment, in one way or another, since my 16th birthday. That year, Dad had given Vivian a brand new car, gleaming in the driveway, while presenting me with a lecture about responsibility and earning privileges. That night, lying in bed, listening to Vivian rev the engine outside, I started researching emancipation laws and alternative living arrangements. My phone buzzed, a text from my best friend, Casey. Everything okay? Vivian posted something really nasty about you on Instagram. Perfect timing. I quickly typed back, family emergency. Staying with relatives out of state for a while. We'll explain later. Before dawn broke, I slipped out through my bedroom window, the same route I'd used countless times for late-night escapes, simply to maintain my sanity. The morning air felt different on my skin, charged with possibility instead of dread. The Greyhound station downtown was exactly as depressing as I'd imagined, but the elderly woman behind the ticket counter had kind eyes. "Where to, honey?" she asked. "Chicago," I said, a sense of destiny in my voice. I'd researched cities with good job markets and affordable housing for months. One way. The bus pulled away from everything I'd ever known at precisely 7:42 a.m. I calculated that my absence wouldn't be discovered until dinner, when Dad would inevitably summon me for some formal apology ritual. My phone remained off for the entire 8-hour journey. When the Chicago skyline finally appeared, steel and glass reaching towards a future I could finally imagine, a huge weight lifted from my shoulders. The YMCA downtown offered temporary housing for young adults, and the social worker there, Mrs. Rodriguez, helped me understand my options. Emancipation is complicated for 17-year-olds, she explained during my intake interview. The process typically takes several months, requires extensive documentation, and multiple court hearings. But we can help you get started while providing safe temporary housing. I'd been smart about evidence gathering over the past year. Screenshots of Vivian's cruel social media posts about me. Photos of my destroyed belongings. Voice recordings of Dad's increasingly harsh punishments while Vivian consistently escaped consequences for identical behavior. A journal meticulously documenting incidents of favoritism spanning 3 years. This was the kind of systematic documentation that family court judges needed to see. "This is very thorough," Mrs. Rodriguez said, reviewing my evidence folder, her eyebrows raised. "But I have to warn you, the legal process will likely take 4 to 6 months, and your parents will be notified once you file. Are you prepared for that confrontation?" I nodded, having anticipated this timeline. My immediate goal was safe housing and income, not instant legal resolution. The YMCA's youth housing program provided a small room and access to job placement services. My first week in Chicago was spent walking the streets near DePaul University, looking for entry-level positions that could support basic living expenses. The coffee shop job came through the YMCA's employment coordinator, who had developed relationships with local businesses willing to hire young people in transitional situations. The owner, Maria Santos, was a first-generation immigrant who understood desperation and determination. Meanwhile, back home, chaos was unfolding exactly as I'd anticipated. Casey called Wednesday evening, her voice tight with shock. "Your parents filed a missing persons report. There are police cars at your house. Your dad looks absolutely destroyed." The missing persons investigation complicated my emancipation proceedings, just as Mrs. Rodriguez had warned. "The court can't process your petition while you're technically considered a runaway," she explained during our weekly meeting. "We need to resolve the police investigation first." This required a carefully orchestrated legal strategy. Mrs. Rodriguez connected me with a family law attorney who specialized in youth advocacy cases. Richard Martinez had handled dozens of emancipation cases and understood the delicate balance between parental rights and youth protection. "We'll need to notify the police that you're safe and represented by counsel," he explained. "Then we can begin formal emancipation proceedings. The process will take approximately 6 months given your age and the complexity of documenting systematic favoritism." Thursday brought another update from Casey. "Your mom came home from work crying. Vivian's been locked in her room all day. I think she's freaking out that this is somehow her fault." It was her fault, though not entirely. Years of manipulation and cruelty had created this situation, but Vivian was just a symptom of the real problem. Our parents had created a toxic hierarchy that poisoned everything. Friday's news hit differently. "The police found your phone records and know you went to Chicago. Your dad drove there yesterday looking for you. He came back this morning looking like he'd aged 10 years. My court appointment was scheduled for the following spring after months of legal preparation and documentation review." The judge, Honorable Patricia Williams, had reviewed my case extensively before the hearing. Dad had hired an attorney and was present, looking haggard and utterly confused after 6 months of legal proceedings. "Miss Marshall," Judge Williams addressed me, her gaze steady. "You've presented compelling evidence of systematic favoritism and emotional neglect over an extended period. Your documentation demonstrates the kind of thorough preparation this court requires for emancipation cases. However," she paused, "I want to ensure you understand the gravity of legal emancipation." "I do, Your Honor. I've researched extensively and have support systems in place." Dad's lawyer whispered urgently in his ear. I could see realization dawning across his features, finally understanding how carefully I'd planned this escape. "Your Honor," Dad's attorney said, "my client is willing to enter family counseling and address these concerns. Surely removing this child from her home permanently is excessive." Judge Williams' expression remained neutral, unwavering. Mr. Marshall, your daughter has documented a pattern of differential treatment spanning several years. The court is not interested in family counseling that should have begun long ago. The gavel fell with finality. Legally emancipated. At 18, with a work permit and temporary guardian designation through the state, I was free. Dad approached me afterward, his face gray with shock. Sweetheart, please come home. We'll figure this out. You had 18 years to figure this out, I replied calmly, my voice steady. You chose Vivian every single time. Now you get to live with that choice. The job market in Chicago remained challenging, but I'd established myself over the months of legal proceedings. Maria, my boss at the coffee shop, had gradually increased my responsibilities as I proved reliable. By the time my emancipation was finalized, I was training new employees and handling some inventory management. College remained my long-term goal, but the path required strategic planning. My GED scores qualified me for community college admission, but I needed to save money while establishing academic credentials that would eventually support a transfer to a 4-year university. Sharing a tiny apartment came 3 months later when I'd saved enough for a security deposit and proven my employment stability. My roommates, Jessica and Amanda, were both junior psychology majors at a local state college who needed help with rent. They'd initially been skeptical about living with someone so young, but my references from Maria and the YMCA housing coordinator convinced them to take a chance. My days were exhausting. Full-time work, starting at 6 a.m., followed by evening GED preparation classes funded by a city program for emancipated minors. I collapsed into bed each night, knowing I'd never again wake up in a house where my existence was merely tolerated. But the schedule left little time for anything resembling a social life. My roommates quickly became the protective older sisters I'd never had. Jessica taught me how to navigate the city's public transportation system, while Amanda helped me practice interview skills for better-paying positions. You're different from most teenagers, Jessica observed one evening as we split a pizza that constituted dinner for all 3 of us. More focused. Like you've already figured out what adults spend years learning. Amanda nodded thoughtfully. It's like you've been forced to grow up faster than you should have. Their casual acceptance of my maturity felt revolutionary. At home, any sign of independence had been labeled as defiance or disrespect. Here, my self-reliance was simply acknowledged and appreciated. Maria, the coffee shop owner, had built her business from nothing. She recognized something familiar in my determination to survive on my own terms. Within a month, she promoted me from basic barista to assistant manager, teaching me inventory management and customer service skills that would prove invaluable later. You remind me of myself at your age, Maria told me during a particularly busy morning rush. Stubborn as hell and twice as smart as anyone gives you credit for. She began sharing stories of her own family dysfunction, parents who'd expected her to remain dependent and traditional rather than pursuing education and business ownership. The parallels to my situation were striking, though Maria's rebellion had taken place in her 20s rather than her teens. The hardest part isn't leaving, she explained while we restocked supplies after closing. It's not looking back when they finally realize what they lost. Her words proved prophetic. The guilt trips would begin soon enough. October brought my first real test of independence. I developed a severe case of the flu that left me bedridden for a week, burning through my carefully saved sick days and putting my job at risk. At home, Mom would have fussed over me with soup and medicine, despite her other flaws. But here, Jessica and Amanda rallied around me with surprising tenderness, taking turns bringing me fluids and checking my temperature. Amanda even skipped a date to stay home when my fever spiked dangerously high. This is what family actually looks like, Amanda said simply when I tried to thank her. The revelation hit me like a physical force. Real family members supported each other without keeping score, without ulterior motives, without conditional love based on favoritism. My biological family had never functioned this way. Maria held my position despite the missed shifts, even covering my hours personally rather than hiring temporary help. Good employees are worth investing in, she said when I returned to work, still weak but determined. The contrast between this unconditional support and my family's treatment felt stark. Here, people valued my contribution and wanted me to succeed. At home, my presence had always been tolerated at best, actively resented at worst. November brought news that Mom had started calling local shelters and youth services, claiming she was worried about my safety. The social worker who contacted me seemed skeptical of her concern. "Your mother sounds genuinely distressed," Mrs. Rodriguez informed me during one of our monthly check-ins. "She keeps asking if there's any way to convince you to come home." "Did you explain that I'm legally emancipated and thriving?" "Multiple times." "She seems to think this is some kind of phase you'll grow out of." The disconnection from reality was typical. Mom had spent so many years enabling Dad's favoritism that she'd convinced herself the problem was my attitude rather than their parenting. Now she was probably telling herself that I'd eventually realize how good I'd had it at home. Casey's reports confirmed my suspicions. "Your mom keeps telling people you're going through a rebellious phase," she said during one of our weekly calls. "She honestly seems to believe you'll come back on your own once you realize how hard real life is." The delusion would have been funny if it weren't so tragic. Mom had no concept of how much easier my life had become without constant tension, favoritism, and emotional manipulation. Meanwhile, my daily routine in Chicago had developed a comforting rhythm. Wake up at 5:30 a.m. Shower. Eat whatever breakfast our communal kitchen could provide. Catch the 6:45 bus to work. Open the coffee shop at 7 a.m., serving the morning rush of commuters and students. Handle administrative tasks during slow periods. Close at 6 p.m. Evenings were spent on homework for my GED preparation classes, studying with Jessica and Amanda, or exploring the city's free cultural offerings, museums, library events, community college workshops. Chicago provided endless opportunities for self-improvement that cost nothing but time. The GED test arrived in December, and I passed with scores high enough to qualify for community college admission in the spring. Maria celebrated by giving me a small raise and additional management responsibilities. "You're going places," she said with the confidence of someone who had built her own success from nothing. "Just don't forget us little people when you're running the world." Her faith in my potential felt foreign but wonderful. At home, academic achievement had been expected from Vivian, but never encouraged in me. Here, every small victory was celebrated genuinely. Winter in Chicago tested everyone's resilience, but I found the harsh weather oddly comforting. Each snowstorm survived, each frozen morning endured, proved my capacity for independence. The physical challenges of city life paled in comparison to the emotional challenges I'd faced at home. Christmas approached with surprisingly little emotional difficulty. Jessica and Amanda invited me to join their families for the holidays, but I chose to work double shifts instead, earning holiday pay and giving them more time with their loved ones. "Are you sure?" Amanda asked. "My parents would love to meet you, and my mom always cooks for an army." The invitation was genuine and kind, but I wasn't ready for surrogate family experiences. My independence was too new, too precious to risk diluting with borrowed familial warmth. Christmas Day at the coffee shop was quiet but peaceful. A few regular customers stopped by, grateful that we'd stayed open for people without traditional family plans. Maria worked alongside me, and we spent the slow hours sharing stories about previous Christmases that had been either wonderful or terrible. "You know what I've learned?" Maria said as we cleaned espresso machines in the late afternoon. "Sometimes the families we choose treat us better than the families we're born into." Her observation felt particularly relevant as Casey's updates continued painting a picture of dysfunction at home. Vivian was apparently having daily meltdowns about college applications, unable to handle academic pressure without someone to blame for her stress. "She keeps asking your dad why you were always better at school," Casey reported. "He doesn't know how to answer because he'd never really paid attention to your grades before." The irony was perfect. Dad was finally noticing my academic abilities, but only in contrast to Vivian's struggles. Even in my absence, I was being used as a measuring stick. January brought community college registration and my first real taste of higher education. The campus was modest compared to Northwestern or DePaul, but it represented possibility in ways that high school never had. The financial aid office had worked with me to maximize grants and work-study opportunities, making my education financially sustainable despite my limited resources. My advisor, Professor Williams, was a former social worker who'd returned to academia after 20 years in family services. She took one look at my background and academic potential and immediately began planning a strategic course load. "You're intellectually ready for university-level work," she said during our first meeting. "But financially, this 2-year path is smart. Excellent grades here, then transfer to somewhere that can offer significant scholarships." Her strategic thinking impressed me. She understood that my circumstances required careful planning rather than traditional academic timelines, and she helped me balance credit loads with work obligations. The classes themselves felt like liberation. Philosophy challenged my thinking about ethics and justice in ways that helped me process my family experiences. Literature introduced me to characters who'd overcome circumstances similar to mine. Mathematics provided logical frameworks that felt comforting after years of emotional chaos. My professors treated me like an adult capable of handling complex ideas. Nobody questioned my maturity or suggested that my youth disqualified me from serious academic work. The contrast to high school, where teachers had constantly compared me unfavorably to Vivian, was transformative. Study groups formed naturally around challenging assignments, and I found myself appreciated for my analytical skills and work ethic. These relationships felt different from friendships I'd attempted in high school, based on mutual respect rather than social hierarchies. "You ask really good questions," my philosophy study partner, David, observed after we'd worked through a particularly complex ethical dilemma. "Like, you've actually lived through moral complexity instead of just reading about it." His assessment was accurate but painful. I had lived through moral complexity, watching my parents choose favoritism over fairness year after year. Those experiences had given me a practical understanding of ethical failure that most 19-year-olds lacked. Spring semester brought increasingly challenging coursework and my first romantic relationship that wasn't complicated by family dysfunction. David was a pre-med student, serious and kind, who appreciated my independence rather than finding it threatening. "Most girls our age are still figuring out who they want to be," he said during one of our coffee dates. "You already know exactly who you are." The relationship developed slowly, built on genuine compatibility rather than teenage drama. David understood that my past was complicated without demanding details I wasn't ready to share. He respected my boundaries while offering emotional support that felt completely foreign. "Your family doesn't deserve you," he said simply after I'd shared basic details about my emancipation. "But I'm grateful their loss became my gain." His straightforward appreciation felt revolutionary. At home, expressing affection for me had always been conditional on not upsetting Vivian's feelings. David's feelings existed independently, without requiring anyone else's approval or permission. Meanwhile, my professional development continued advancing steadily. Over 18 months, Maria had gradually increased my responsibilities as I proved reliable and capable. I'd moved from basic barista work to training new employees, managing inventory, and handling vendor relationships. "I want to offer you a management position when you graduate," she said during our annual review meeting. "Full-time with benefits and profit sharing. But I know you've got bigger plans than running a coffee shop forever." Her faith in my potential was touching, even as I knew she was right about my larger ambitions. The coffee shop had been a sanctuary and a practical stepping stone, but law school was calling more strongly each semester. Casey's updates continued painting the ongoing destruction back home. "Vivian got arrested for shoplifting last weekend," she reported in December. "Apparently, she's been stealing makeup and clothes for months. Your dad had to bail her out." Without me as a scapegoat, Vivian's behavioral problems became impossible to ignore. The same acting out that had been excused as teenage rebellion now looked like what it actually was: entitled, destructive behavior from someone who'd never faced meaningful consequences. "Your dad looks terrible every time I see him," Casey added. "Mrs. Patterson from next door told my mom he just sits in his car in the driveway sometimes, staring at your bedroom window." The image should have produced satisfaction, but instead, I felt empty. This wasn't really revenge in any traditional sense. I hadn't actively destroyed anything. I'd simply removed myself from a toxic situation, and the system had collapsed under its own dysfunction. Christmas came and went without contact from my family. I worked double shifts at the coffee shop, saving money and enjoying the peaceful anonymity of holiday customers who didn't know my history. January brought the most shocking update yet. Vivian's moving to your mom's sister's place in Oregon, Casey told me. Apparently, she and your dad had a huge fight after she wrecked her car drunk driving. No one was hurt, but your dad finally snapped and said he couldn't handle her anymore. The irony was devastating. Dad had sacrificed his relationship with me to protect and enable Vivian, only to have her behavior become so problematic that he eventually rejected her, too. She lost the favoritism that defined her entire identity. He's completely alone now, Casey continued. The house is for sale. I guess he can't afford it anymore with the divorce and legal fees. February marked 6 months since I'd left home. My new life had rhythm and meaning. Classes at community college challenged me intellectually. My coworkers had become genuine friends. I'd even started dating someone, a kind pre-med student named David, who thought my independence was admirable rather than threatening. The first contact from my family came on my 19th birthday. A handwritten letter arrived at my Northwestern address, somehow tracked down through bureaucratic channels I couldn't identify. Dear daughter, it began in Dad's careful handwriting. I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I need you to understand how sorry I am. Your mother and I have been in counseling, both together and separately, and we're beginning to understand how badly we failed you. The letter continued for 3 pages, detailing their growing awareness of the favoritism I'd endured. Dad described watching home videos and being horrified by how differently he treated his daughters. He wrote about Vivian's struggles and his realization that enabling her had ultimately harmed her, too. I don't expect forgiveness, the letter concluded. I just wanted you to know that your actions opened our eyes to truths we've been avoiding for years. You were the strongest person in our family, and we punished you for it. I'm proud of who you've become, even though I played no part in your growth. I read the letter 3 times before filing it away. The apology felt genuine, but honestly irrelevant. Too much damage had been done. Too many years of second-class treatment endured. Spring brought news that Dad had moved to a small apartment across town while Mom was apparently thriving in her new independence. Vivian was struggling in Oregon, bouncing between relatives who quickly grew tired of her entitled attitude. She keeps asking about you, Casey reported. I think she wants to reach out, but she's scared you hate her. I didn't hate Vivian, exactly. She'd been a child, manipulating a system that rewarded her cruelty. Our parents had created the monster, but she'd chosen to embrace the role with enthusiasm. My first year of college began that fall, funded by scholarships, student loans, and my coffee shop savings. I found an academic advisor who understood my unconventional path and helped me plan for pre-law studies. The injustice I'd experienced had sparked a deep interest in family advocacy work. The second letter arrived on my 20th birthday. This one was from Mom. Shorter, but equally emotional. I know I have no right to contact you, she wrote, but I wanted you to know that I think about you every day. I've been working with a therapist to understand how I failed so completely as your mother. I was so focused on keeping the peace that I sacrificed my own child's well-being. She described the family counseling sessions where a therapist had helped them understand the toxic dynamics they'd created. Apparently, Vivian had admitted to years of deliberate cruelty, finally acknowledging behavior she had previously justified or denied. Your father and I are divorced now, the letter continued. We couldn't rebuild a relationship after realizing how our marriage had damaged our children. We're both working on becoming better people, but we know it's too late to be better parents to you. The honesty was refreshing, even if the timing was tragically wrong. College life suited me perfectly. My professors appreciated my maturity and work ethic, and my part-time work-study schedule at the legal aid clinic allowed me to gain practical experience while pursuing my degree. The combination of scholarship funding and clinic stipends made my education financially sustainable. Without the crushing debt load most students faced, I'd made friends who knew nothing about my family history. People who valued me for who I was rather than comparing me to anyone else. For the first time, I existed as my own complete person. News from home became increasingly sporadic. Casey was busy with her own college experience at Ohio State. The dramatic updates slowed to occasional mentions of family members spotted around our hometown, looking older and sadder. For years into my new life, I received a call that changed everything. Casey's voice was shaky with shock. "It's about Vivian," she said. "She's in the hospital. Apparent suicide attempt. Your parents are both there, and they asked me to find a way to contact you." The news hit like cold water. Whatever anger I'd harbored toward my sister, I'd never wanted her to suffer this deeply. Vivian was now 21 years old, technically an adult, but still struggling with the identity crisis that had begun when I'd removed myself as her constant comparison point. "How bad is it?" I asked. "She's stable now, but it was serious. Pills and alcohol. A roommate found her and called 911. I stared out my apartment window at the Chicago skyline, weighing obligations against self-preservation. The family that had rejected me was now asking for my presence in their crisis. "They don't expect you to come," Casey added quickly. "Your mom just wanted you to know in case you heard about it somewhere else." The decision took 3 days of careful consideration. Finally, I booked a flight home, not out of family loyalty, but from simple human compassion. Vivian was barely an adult, and she was suffering. The hospital waiting room looked exactly like every medical drama I'd ever seen, harsh lighting and uncomfortable chairs. Mom had aged dramatically in 2 years. Her hair was now gray, and her face lined with stress. Dad looked even worse, thin and hollowed. They both stood when they saw me, uncertain and hopeful. "Thank you for coming," Mom said simply. "I know you didn't have to." "How is she?" I asked, skipping past emotional reunions. "Physically recovering," Dad replied. "Mentally, she's been struggling for months. The therapist says she is dealing with depression and anxiety that probably started years ago." We sat in awkward silence until a doctor emerged with updates. Vivian was awake and asking to see me, which surprised everyone, including myself. The girl in the hospital bed looked nothing like the confident tormentor I remembered. Vivian appeared fragile and young, her face puffy from crying and medical procedures. "Hi," she said quietly when I entered. "Hi. I didn't think you'd come." "Neither did I." She studied my face, searching for familiar dynamics that no longer existed. "You look good." "Happy." "I am happy." "I'm glad," she said, and I knew she meant it. "I've been thinking about you a lot, about everything that happened." The conversation that followed was unlike any we'd ever had. Vivian talked about years of therapy, slowly understanding how the favoritism had damaged us both. She described feeling empty and purposeless without the constant competition she'd been trained to win. "I built my whole identity around being better than you," she admitted. "When you left, I realized I didn't know who I was without that comparison." The insight was more mature than I'd expected from her. "And who are you now?" "I'm figuring that out." "It's harder than I thought it would be." We talked for an hour, carefully navigating years of hurt and misunderstanding. Vivian apologized for specific cruelties I'd almost forgotten, taking responsibility without making excuses. "I don't expect forgiveness," she said, echoing Dad's letter. "I just wanted you to know that I understand what I did was wrong. You deserve so much better from all of us." The apology felt different from our parents' letters. Vivian had lost everything, too, her identity, her family structure, her sense of purpose. She understood consequences in a way that forced growth. Before leaving, I met briefly with Mom and Dad in the hospital cafeteria. They looked nervous, uncertain how to interact with the daughter they'd driven away. "You've done well for yourself," Mom said, studying my confident posture and professional clothes. "Your Aunt Paula mentioned seeing an article about you in the community college newsletter, Dean's List." "Yes. I'm transferring to Northwestern next fall for pre-law." Pride flickered across Dad's face before guilt quickly replaced it. "That's wonderful. We're proud of you, even though we have no right to be." The conversation remained surface level, everyone afraid of triggering deeper emotions. We were strangers now, connected only by shared DNA and painful history. "Will you stay in touch?" Mom asked as I prepared to leave. I don't know, I answered honestly. This is still very complicated for me. The flight back to Chicago gave me hours to process the reunion. Seeing my family's destruction hadn't provided the satisfaction I'd once imagined. Instead, I felt a complex mixture of sadness, relief, and something approaching closure. Vivian and I began exchanging occasional emails after her hospital release, brief updates about therapy progress, college plans, and gradual healing. She was attending a state school in Oregon, studying psychology and working to understand the dynamics that had shaped our childhood. I think I want to help other families, she wrote in one email. Maybe prevent other siblings from going through what we did. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. We both ended up in helping professions, shaped by our traumatic family dynamics in different but parallel ways. My relationship with our parents remained minimal. Christmas cards were exchanged, brief and polite. They respected my boundaries without pushing for more intimate connection, seeming to understand that some damage was permanent. Northwestern accepted me with a partial scholarship, recognition of both academic achievement and life experience. My admissions essay about family dysfunction and personal resilience had apparently resonated with reviewers. Law school became my new focus, with plans to specialize in family advocacy and children's rights. The skills I developed surviving my dysfunctional family, careful documentation, strategic planning, emotional resilience, translated surprisingly well to legal studies. 3 years after leaving home, I graduated summa cum laude with my bachelor's degree. My parents sent a congratulatory card, but didn't ask to attend the ceremony. Casey came instead, cheering loudly when my name was called. "Look at you," she said afterward, wiping away tears. "You saved yourself and became exactly who you were meant to be." The transformation felt complete. I was no longer the rejected daughter, the scapegoat, the invisible child competing for scraps of attention. I was my own person, successful and independent, building a life based on my values rather than my family's dysfunction. Law school acceptance letters arrived the following spring. I chose Georgetown, drawn to their family law clinic and advocacy programs. My personal statement about growing up in a toxic household had apparently impressed admissions committees across the country. The last update from home came through Casey as I prepared to move to Washington, D.C. "Your parents are doing okay," she reported. They see each other occasionally at family therapy sessions, working on understanding what went wrong. Vivian's doing well in school and has a boyfriend who seems really nice. The news felt distant but positive. Everyone was rebuilding their lives, learning to exist without the toxic dynamics that had once defined our family system. Moving to DC felt like the final chapter in my escape story. Georgetown's campus was everything I'd hoped for, full of ambitious students who'd also overcome significant obstacles. My faculty advisor had reviewed my background and was excited to work with someone who brought lived experience to family law studies. The coffee shop job in Chicago had taught me valuable customer service skills, but my new work-study position in the university's legal aid clinic felt like coming home. Helping families navigate crisis situations drew on everything I'd learned about toxic dynamics, systematic favoritism, and the courage required to break destructive patterns. My first case involved a teenager seeking emancipation from parents who'd repeatedly chosen her younger brother over her well-being. The parallels to my own experience were striking, but I maintained professional boundaries while ensuring she received the advocacy I'd wished for during my own struggles. "How did you know exactly what documentation I needed?" she asked during our third meeting. "Experience," I replied simply. The case concluded successfully, with the court granting emancipation and custody arrangements that protected her from further emotional abuse. Watching her walk out of the courthouse with relief and hope reminded me why I'd chosen this path. 5 years had passed since I'd said "all right" to my father's ultimatum and walked away from everything I'd ever known. The scared 17-year-old who boarded a Greyhound bus to Chicago no longer existed. In her place stood someone confident, educated, and purposeful, a 22-year-old college graduate preparing for law school. My phone buzzed with an unexpected text from Vivian. Saw an article about Georgetown's family law clinic online. It mentioned a student who had been emancipated at 17 and was now helping other families. I'm proud of you." The message was simple but profound. My sister, who'd once tormented me relentlessly, now recognized and celebrated my achievements. The healing between us remained incomplete, but genuine respect had replaced competitive hostility. That evening, I walked through Georgetown's historic campus, reflecting on the unexpected journey that had brought me here. Dad's ultimatum had been intended as punishment, a way to force my compliance through isolation. Instead, it had become the catalyst for the most important decision of my life. The family that had rejected me for defending myself had ultimately destroyed itself through its own dysfunction. Meanwhile, I had built something beautiful from the ashes of that rejection. A career dedicated to protecting others from the kind of systematic favoritism that had nearly broken me. The revenge hadn't been intentional, but it was complete. I'd become everything they'd prevented me from being when I lived under their roof. Success, happiness, and purpose had replaced the anger and hurt I carried for so many years. Walking past the law school building where I'd spend the next 3 years, I realized the scared girl who'd once desperately craved her father's approval had evolved into someone who needed validation from no one. That transformation was worth more than any apology they could offer. The story that began with a suspended daughter had ended with a woman who'd found her own voice and dedicated her life to helping others find theirs. Sometimes the best revenge is simply becoming the person you were meant to be all along. So, I've told you my story. I'm curious, what would you have done if you were in my shoes that night? Did I do the right thing, or would you have handled things differently? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I really want to hear what you think.